Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
A strange man who is just cheating, or is there someone else involved? In our story today, we're going to find out. Enjoy watching it. And on the seventh day, God calmed down and said, "Okay, Bob," calling him anything but Robert Carlson. He stretched out in his chair and thought, "I'm certainly not God, but my life is good," and indeed he should be able to feel it. He was almost 50 years old, in good shape, and in good health. His hair fell out early, but his bald spot was beautiful, and his wife Charlie loved to rub it, especially when they made love. He stood 6 feet tall and was only 10 pounds heavier than when he graduated high school, weighing 190 pounds. He was muscular without the usual barrel waist. Instead of a six-pack, he had a solid physique. He was a project manager for a large construction firm and was working on the final stages of construction of a multi-story bank building before starting the next project on the other side of town. Bobby met Charlie Rivers in college. At the time, she was pursuing a liberal arts degree and had no real purpose in life. She was your typical girl next door, with shoulder-length brown hair, brown eyes, 5 feet 6 inches tall, and weighing 120 pounds. Back then, her breasts had a firm B shape. With each pregnancy, she increased her breast size slightly until she reached a firm C cup. Yes, the typical girl next door, whom Bobby might not have noticed until she smiled. Her smile lit up the room and made everyone, without exception, smile back. Everything became warmer when Charlie smiled. That was the first thing that attracted Bobby to her. He just couldn't get enough of that smile and did everything to make it happen. She now weighed 130 pounds and was holding up well. Both Bobby and Charlie enjoyed walking, hiking, jogging, and aerobic exercise together as much as possible. Some of the most important decisions were made while they were working and talking together. 10 years ago, Bobby had sent Charlie to nursing school, and she now worked in the maternity ward of the local hospital, where she claimed to be completely satisfied with helping new mothers and babies. She worked the day shift so the couple could be together every night. 3 children were born from their union. Bobby smiled to himself thinking about the kids. Ted was now 23 years old and had graduated from college a year ago with a teaching degree. Now he was working as a high school teacher in a tough school, trying to make a difference and probably having more success than failure. Greg was 21 years old and still in school. He had an aptitude for mechanical drawing and was looking forward to a career in design. Both young men were built like their father, tall and muscular but without bulk. They played active sports in high school and intramural sports in college to stay in shape. While they were growing up, neither of them had any problems. The Carlson clan is completed by 18-year-old Chelsea. At this age, she was an exact copy of her mother, the girl next door looks, with brown hair and brown eyes. She had just graduated from high school and was looking forward to going to nursing school. She was determined to follow in her mother's footsteps and become the next Carlson to help new mothers and babies succeed. Yes, Bobby was happy. Their house was paid for, their last car was purchased with cash, they had a boat and a camp so they could spend weekends on the lake. Although Charlie didn't like to fish, the whole family enjoyed water skiing and wakeboarding as much as possible. They had money in an emergency savings account and substantial savings in matching 401k plans that would allow them to retire in a few years. To top it all off, they turned 25 this month. The kids were planning a couple's party with all their friends and extended family. Bobby could only wish that his parents could see his children grow up into wonderful adults, but they tragically died in a car accident 15 years ago. Bobby was trying to decide what to get his wife for their silver anniversary. As a joke, he told her that he would buy her a silver spoon so that she could act as if she was born with it in her mouth. She laughed and said she wanted to take a picture with a spoon in her mouth just for him. He was seriously trying to decide which silver coffee or tea set would suit her best. She loved to host small parties with her best friends, and the silverware made her day more fun. Bobby was also thinking about taking time off and planning a second honeymoon. It seemed that over the past few months, Charlie had become a little distant in the bedroom. Bobby chalked it up to work and maybe a little menopause, but they hadn't been bouncing on the bed in intimate bliss for almost 2 months and had been sporadic before that. This was not normal for the couple. They had given each other their virginity and spent many pleasant hours exploring their intimacy. Their trust in each other had served them well in their exploration. They tried almost everything under the sun. Bobby had a random thought. Perhaps their dry spell was preparation for a fantastic anniversary night of passionate, but ultimately great, intim. He could only hope that was the case. He stood up from his chair. It was Saturday, and Charlie had to work that weekend. Lately, staffing had been short, so she'd had to pick up extra shifts, including some mid-weekend night shifts. This was the only time they didn't sleep in the same bed. It was hard, but he understood her dedication to her patients and colleagues. He decided to go to the pub to have a beer with a couple of friends. Troy Davis and Spence Sadler had been Bobby's friends for many years. There wasn't much they could talk about, but Bobby wasn't ready to discuss his lack of intimacy with Charlie yet. The beer would taste good on a warm summer afternoon. As he entered the pub, he saw his friends along with a couple of other men occupying a booth at the back. One of the strangers seemed to have captured everyone's attention, fascinating them with his story. As Bobby approached the stand, he heard the stranger describe the identification mark of his latest conquest. He stopped in amazement at this comment. "Look, guys, this one is great in bed. I just set her up with my story about terminal cancer, and she couldn't get to me fast enough. She's not a knockout in the classic sense, but she knows how to have a night." Bobby couldn't believe his ears. This idiot was describing Charlie. What the hell was going on? He was so stunned that he couldn't even speak. One of the others asked how the stranger got so lucky with women. He called him Ron and seemed to be a casual friend. Ron talked all the time about his technique. It all started about 5 years ago. My wife, Terry, started telling me about a guy at work who was lonely and had cancer. She felt so sorry for him that she started bringing him soup and other things every evening. A month later, I asked her when she would come home to me, and she said that I was an idiot and that I only thought about myself. Eventually, I realized that she was sleeping with him. This was part of her comforting actions. It took him about 3 years to die. By that time, she was living with him and never called to see how I was. After his death, she suddenly decided she could return home. I let her come back, but I already had a couple of roommates, so I didn't need her except to clean the house. Then she found another unfortunate man and moved in with him. He continued, "I've learned that women are drawn to sad stories. I go to a bar, sit, and sip one drink, looking as sad as possible. It may take a while, but someone is bound to ask what's wrong. Then I do a kind of I don't want to talk about it. Of course, it drives women crazy because they want to help. She will work hard to get me to open up until I finally tell her that I'm alone without a family and have a life to live for only a few weeks due to terminal cancer. A woman usually falls for me to make me feel better. Sometimes it takes a couple of nights, like with my last trophy, but they always end up in my bed. If it makes me happier, I even make them stop making love to their boyfriends or husbands while they're taking care of me. It makes them feel like they're actually helping me, and when I die, they can go back to their men and give them their full attention." He leaned back with a smug smile. "It has never failed me." Spence asked the obvious question, what happens when they realize you're deceiving them? Ron made a pleased expression, which angered Bobby even more. If they understand, they usually explode and leave, but I've already gotten a lot of intimate from each of them. If they don't understand and start talking about needing to go back to their boyfriends or husbands, I agree and send them home. Only a couple of women hit me in the face and accused me. No one ever told their man what happened. I think they feel too guilty about being deceived. It's usually over before the husband realizes what happened. Even if he does, he doesn't know me, and I'm sure any woman who buys this story is too embarrassed to admit it. Bobby was seething inside. Did this explain why Charlie was taking extra hours lately? Hell, on the nights she was supposedly working, she could be sleeping with that man. He could almost understand how she could have been deceived by such a scoundrel. Her whole life was built on helping people. But she worked in the maternity ward. How could she have met him? Troy seemed to read his thoughts, even though Bobby didn't turn around or make his presence known. "How did you meet your latest victim?" Ron grinned. "Right here in this pub. When I walked in, there were 4 or 5 nurses in their uniforms having a drink after work. I just sat down at the table and made a sad face, and within 15 minutes, they all started asking how I felt. then it was a small matter of choosing one of them. I chose my new victim by her age, she is middle-aged, and by her smile. I swear she could make the patient feel better with that smile, Ron said. He ordered another drink before continuing. Bob managed to find a chair and sit in the corner of the group. It was either sit down or fall down. He waved to the bartender and ordered a straight whiskey. Beer wouldn't help today. The bartender soon returned with his drink, and Bob took a long sip, feeling the burn as the alcohol went down. Bob expected his stomach to rebel, but the anger he began to feel made his stomach feel like an iron tank. He drank slowly, listening and forming a plan to make Mr. Ron regret what he did to Bob and the other men. Ron was indifferent and enjoyed his celebrity status. The other men in the group were contemplating whether to try his method to get a woman. He continued to boast of his conquests. I can't believe how responsive she is. Her husband must be going crazy with desire because I told her not to have a night with him anytime soon. She's giving it all to me. In fact, we'll meet in half an hour. He got up. Sorry to leave you guys, but I need to get ready. I usually meet her in my pajamas since I'm too weak to go out much, you know, this incurable cancer. He didn't even look at Bob as he walked out. Of course, he didn't know what Bob looked like. Bob looked at his friends and nodded, then followed Ron out of the pub. He tried not to look interested in his victim, but Ron was so confident that he never looked back, didn't look around, and calmly walked toward the small apartment building. Before entering apartment number 4, Bob found a secluded spot in the doorway that provided him with cover but still allowed him to see Ron's apartment door. Later, when Charlie arrived, Bob would ask his friends to find out Ron's last name. Right before Charlie arrived at the apartment door, Bob remembered the camera function on his phone. He took some good shots of Ron greeting Charlie in his loose clothes, trying to look sick. In one photo, they hugged and then kissed before going inside. Bob was left outside, confused. All this time, he hoped and prayed that his beloved would never do this to them, their family, and their marriage. Now he was faced with the fact of his wife's infidelity, regardless of her excuses, right on the eve of their silver anniversary. Standing there and observing the apartment, he tried to think of something silver other than a tea or coffee set that he could give to his cheating wife. He wanted something that would immediately let her know what she had done to him. After a lot of consideration, he decided on something straight out of Western folklore. Yes, that would let her know exactly how he felt. Bob kept track of the time. If she was going to get home in time without him becoming suspicious of her, she had to hurry. As if she heard his thoughts, the door opened, and Bob took a few more pictures of the loving couple as Ron and Charlie kissed, before they ways parted and Charlie headed to her car. Exhausted, Bob headed back to the pub. It was too hard to realize that just in the morning, he had been so happy with his life that he compared himself to God resting on the 7th day. It is not surprising that pride is considered one of the deadly sins. When he arrived at the pub, Troy and Spence were still sitting at the same table. Everyone had a glass of beer in front of them. "Hey, Bobby, where did you go?" Spence asked. Bobby decided to confide in his close friends. "When I heard your friend Ron describe his latest mistress, I was completely stunned. He described Charlie right down to her birthmark. I couldn't believe it. You can't imagine how hard it was to keep from lashing out at that liar and not beat him to a pulp." Both Troy and Spence had their mouths open. "No way, not Charlie." "You must be mistaken," Troy blurted out. Spence nodded in agreement. "Charlie would never do something like that. She would never cheat on you." Bobby shook his head. "I know. I thought so too." Then I followed Ron to his apartment and saw Charlie come to his door and kiss him when he opened. They were there for a long time, and when she left, he squeezed her 5th place. He paused for a moment to collect himself. "Besides, I didn't tell you that we haven't made love in 2 months. I thought she was just tired and maybe going through menopause, but now I know it's because that idiot asked her not to make love to me." The friends bought another round of beer, and together they began to develop a plan for revenge against Ron. The first thing they decided was to gather more evidence of what Ron was bragging about. Spence could help with that. He owned a small electronics store and had access to all the necessary cameras, recorders, and GPS devices to catch Ron in the act. Spence even knew someone who could break into Ron's apartment and install cameras and a recording device without Ron even knowing. After an hour of discussion, they decided to meet again the next day. Even though it was Sunday, Charlie had to work, so Bobby didn't have to make up excuses to leave the house. Spence's wife was out of town for the weekend, and Troy was free. His marriage had ended several years ago, and between alimony and child support, he felt he had no money for dating. He didn't want to admit it, but Ron's scheme had its appeal. However, Troy didn't want to hurt another man like his wife had done. They finished their beer and went home. Bobby faced the difficult task of acting as if he didn't know what Charlie was doing behind his back. Bobby had never had to gamble in his life and didn't know how to handle it. Approaching the house, he suddenly found inspiration. Instead of trying to act normal, why not be sad and depressed? He relaxed and opened the door. His face must have looked quite sad because Charlie noticed it immediately. "What's wrong, honey? You look like you lost your best friend." Bobby stopped and looked at his wife of almost 25 years. He suddenly doubted whether they would have a 26th anniversary. This made him even sadder. It was time for his trick. "I was at the pub with Troy and Spence. A mutual friend of ours, whom you probably don't know, got some terrible news. He has terminal cancer and only a month to live. He's already in palliative care and in a lot of pain." Charlie walked over and hugged her husband. Bobby forced himself to relax in her arms instead of tensing up. He began to cry a little at the seeming death of his marriage, which helped him avoid confronting his unfaithful wife directly. Charlie believed the whole story. It didn't even occur to her that Bobby was using Ron's diagnosis. She didn't have the slightest suspicion. Finally, they separated and sat down to dinner. Chelsea wasn't home. She was on a college trip with a friend and her family, so they were alone. Bobby ate a little, but his stomach was upset, and he had no appetite. After fiddling with the food on his plate for a while, he finally gave in, excused himself, and took his plate and cutlery to the kitchen, washed them, and placed them in the dishwasher. He then told Charlie that he needed to do something in their small office and went into the room, closing the door behind him. He sat down and stared at the corner of the wall where a spider was stubbornly trying to weave a web. Every night, Bobby destroyed the web, but every day the spider wove a new one. It was a battle of wills that the spider might win. Bobby was too depressed to destroy the web tonight. After all, the spider was simply doing what nature had programmed it to do. What should he do? He and Charlie had almost 25 years of marriage. He believed that Charlie still loved him, even though he was upset and disgusted by her extramarital affairs. He still loved her. The thought of her cheating on him still made him dizzy. The main question had always been why. Why was she doing this? Can't she see that she's ruining their life together? The only explanation he could find was that she believed she was doing something humane, making the last days of a lonely person better and more fulfilling. She probably justified her betrayal of their vows with the thought that she was helping a man in his last hours. How could she know that he was playing her like a fool? He believed that the lack of love in their recent relationship was Charlie's defense mechanism. She probably felt that meeting Ron's needs was more pressing than Bobby's. Bobby's thoughts were spinning in circles. He would begin to justify his wife's infidelity and be inclined to forgive, but then he would realize that she had betrayed them all, Bobby himself and the children, when she decided to be with a stranger. For whatever reason, he became alternately depressed and angry. He also felt helpless. What could he say to make her feel guilty if she had already justified her actions in her mind? Anything he said would be immediately dismissed as selfish and self-serving. Bobby thought about talking to their pastor but gave up on the idea since their pastor had preached many times about the need to forgive every offense or sin and would probably side with Charlie. No, it finally came down to proving to Charlie that Ron was a deceiver. She needed to learn a lesson about skepticism and ask questions before entering into relationships, even ones that had no intimate connotations. Would Bobby be able to forgive and fully accept her back into their relationship? Would Charlie even want forgiveness? Bobby's head hurt as if it was going to split. He didn't want to turn to sleeping pills or alcohol to solve his problems, but he was willing to make a deal with the devil himself if only it would all go away so he could go back to this morning when he knew absolutely nothing about Charlie's lies and betrayals. He dropped his head on the table and fell asleep from mental exhaustion. Bobby woke up still tired. His dreams were vivid, and each concerned betrayal. Not a single dream had a good ending. In one of them, his own children laughed at his naivety for allowing his wife to cheat. In others, he found himself powerless while Ron and Charlie were together, laughing at him the entire time. Most mornings, Bobby woke up at least somewhat excited, but this morning was different. He even doubted whether he would ever experience any excitement again. He began to wonder if there was something wrong with him that made Charlie seek solace from someone else. What was very clear was that he could not concentrate on any other problem. He couldn't find it in himself to think about work, his children, or a future with or without Charlie. All he could focus on was the fact that his wife had betrayed them both. He wasn't hungry, but he forced himself to get up, go to the bathroom, and splash water on his face. The look in the mirror made him think he had aged 15 years in the last 24 hours. He needed to shave, but he didn't have the strength to do it. He needed to take a shower, but with the same lack of initiative, he was doomed to sit alone for another day. He went to the kitchen and chewed a piece of bread. He didn't have enough energy to fry it or spread butter and jam on it. After washing it down with a glass of water, he left the house. Charlie had already left for work, as she needed to be there by 6 o'clock in the morning. His despair deepened when he realized that she had not even tried to wake him up or cover him with a blanket last night. Maybe she had already decided everything for herself, and this was just the external aspect of the death of their marriage. Hoping she would be honest between now and their anniversary, he couldn't think of a more blatant example of hypocrisy than celebrating 25 years of marriage while she was unfaithful. This reminded him of the gift he had to order immediately to make it in time for the anniversary. He finally forced himself to go for a long walk before meeting Troy and Spence at the pub. When he was quite tired from walking, he stopped and looked around. He shook his head in amazement. He had been so preoccupied with his thoughts that he hadn't paid attention to where he was going, but now he realized he was in the area of Ron's apartment. He suddenly realized that he still didn't know Ron's last name. He thought about reprisal and even revenge against this scoundrel and at the same time didn't even know his name. He shook his head again. Where was the old Bobby? He had never wanted to hurt anyone in his life until today. Now he wanted to see Ron get a taste of his own medicine, so he could never use his deceitful ways again. He wanted Ron to pay for every relationship he disrupted. He didn't care about the women involved, they deserved whatever their betrayed partners could give them, including Charlie. He turned his steps toward the pub and met with his friends. When he entered, he saw Troy and Spence sitting with a couple of other men. One of them turned before Bobby could signal his presence, and he saw that Ron was with them. Bobby immediately turned around and left the pub. He couldn't bring himself to be polite to his wife's lover, especially now that he knew about her infidelity. He hoped that Troy and Spence could gather some important information from Ron. Bobby caught a taxi and went to work instead. He tried to immerse himself in paperwork but was too easily distracted. Eventually, he turned on the radio to a country music channel and let songs about betrayal and pain help him cope with his mood. Now he could concentrate a little better and manage to get some work done. A couple of productive hours passed before he glanced at the time. A quick call to Troy revealed that he had seen Ron and therefore hadn't met up with them. Troy also mentioned that Ron had left the pub just a few minutes ago but seemed to have been with another woman today. Bobby mentally shook his head at the news. He wondered sadly if Charlie would be upset to find out that her lover was seeing someone else. It could have been quite a scene to gather all of Ron's lovers and their partners in one room. This thought gave him a plan. He needed a lot of information. Bobby headed home by taxi. He arrived a few minutes before Charlie returned from work. His appearance made Charlie uneasy. She began to grumble that he had neglected himself and needed a shower and shave. She even scolded him a little for sleeping in the office last night. Bobby couldn't help himself. Why do you care now? You didn't seem to care much this morning where I slept. You didn't try to wake me up or even say goodbye before you left for work. As far as I know, you didn't go to work at all. Maybe you dreamed of someone else and decided to act on it. He paused, waiting for a response, but she didn't answer. As for sleeping in the office, maybe you enjoyed having the bed to yourself. You haven't been very affectionate the last few months when I've been around. I'd rather sleep somewhere else considering all the love you've been showing me. He turned and went straight into the office, closing the door behind him and locking it to ensure she heard. He paused, thinking about the expression on her face as he turned around. Shock was the least thing that showed. Was there surprise and guilt as well? If she had justified her actions, did she feel any guilt at all? He shrugged and sat down at the computer. He quickly wrote an email to Troy and Spence and sent it. He considered erasing all his emails and browser history, fearing that if Charlie suspected he knew about her cheating, she might check his computer for information. He needed to create a fictitious email address and only use the tablet for checking emails. He set this up immediately, since he hadn't used the tablet much since getting it for Christmas. He hoped Charlie would skip it and only check his desktop computer and phone. After setting up the new account, he emailed his friends about his plans, including a strategy to be implemented around the anniversary. They agreed wholeheartedly and replied that Ron's last name was Reynolds and that he was a junior manager at a local mail-order company. Spence's friend was willing to break several laws to help dig up dirt on Ron Reynolds. They believed he had records of all the women he had been involved with since he began his deceitful scheme. Bobby also sent an email to his children, notifying them that more people had been invited to the celebration. He didn't go into detail but asked if they needed a larger room. After sending the emails, he erased all records of communication. The anniversary celebration was a surprise from the children for Charlie. Unfortunately for them, it wouldn't go as planned. Now, Bobby had to pretend to be his wife. He knew he couldn't fake loving expressions, so he decided to pretend it was because of his friend's cancer news. He opened the office door just as Charlie was about to knock. There were traces of tears on her face. Bobby had to harden his heart a little. He wasn't going to give in to any feelings of compassion right now, but he was determined to make some relationships work. He lightly grabbed his wife by the shoulders and held her at arm's length. "Listen, Charlie, I'm sorry for snapping at you a while ago. It was unjustified. I think hearing about the death of a close friend has really thrown me off balance. I think I'm a little depressed about the diagnosis, and it's interfering with our life together. I know you have to work every third weekend, and that was planned, but you work so much that I completely forgot about your regular schedule. I trust you and know that you work a lot. I guess I miss our time together. It seems like we're out of sync with each other now, and I don't want that to continue." Charlie swallowed several times. Bobby wondered if she was going to confess, but she decided not to. "Well, in the end, it doesn't matter," she said finally, smiling slightly. "You're probably right, but all this took me by surprise. Yesterday morning when I left for work, you were fine, and now you're so broken. After you went to the office, I went upstairs to wait for you, but I guess I fell asleep. You could have had a chance, but apparently, you missed the opportunity for me to show you how much I love you." She paused, watching to see how he would react to the news that he had missed the chance to be intimate with her. Bobby maintained a neutral expression. He didn't believe for a minute that she was actually going to be affectionate with him unless it was out of pity because of the news of a friend's illness. She was too influenced by Ron. She continued, "This morning, when I woke up, I was late and had to quickly get ready. I looked into the office and saw you leaning over the table. I quickly checked if you were breathing and breathed a sigh of relief when I saw that you were okay. The room seemed warm enough, so you didn't need the blanket. I left you hoping you would get up and go to bed soon." "Did you?" he asked. He shook his head. "I ate a piece of bread and went for a walk. Finally, I decided to go to work and get some paperwork done. I may have to take a few days off in the coming weeks to babysit a friend before she dies." Charlie quickly caught the second mention of a woman. "Wait, you said she. Who is this?" Bobby had to suppress a smile. "Oh, this is the woman from the main office whom I've known for many years. Do you remember Beverly Jean? I think she was once infatuated with me, but now she is alone and dying. She came and asked me to be her confidant for the short period, and I agreed." Charlie vaguely remembered Beverly Jean, who worked at a construction company. If her memory was correct, Beverly Jean was very attractive with a reputation as a manhunter. "Is this a sudden diagnosis? She's not trying to seduce you into bed, right?" Bobby laughed out loud at her comment. How hypocritical could this situation be? She cheated with a creep who claimed he was dying, and she almost accused Bobby of the same thing. He almost wished he knew someone who was dying and could help put Charlie in her place. No, honey, she's not trying to seduce me. In fact, her libido has completely disappeared due to chemotherapy and radiation. She's also so weak that she can barely eat soup. I have to help her eat sometimes. Perhaps Charlie will learn something from this description of cancer treatment. Bobby let go of Charlie and headed into the kitchen, starting to make himself a sandwich. He continued talking about cancer and death, seemingly forgetting to make a sandwich for his loving wife. In fact, he was deliberately ignoring her basic needs. He then sat down at the table and began to eat, still chatting about chemotherapy, radiation, and the need for daily and sometimes weekly treatments. He had found all this information on the internet the night before to make Charlie believe he actually had a friend who needed help. When he was halfway through his sandwich, Charlie finally stopped him and asked if he had made her one. He tried to look apologetic, stood up slowly, and ate a few more bites before making her a simple ham sandwich, just ham and bread, no sauces, and placed it in front of her. He continued babbling about how chemotherapy is hard on the body and how radiation causes hair loss. It was something Ron obviously knew nothing about, given that his head was covered in thick hair. When Bobby finished, he quickly cleared his side of the table, washed the dishes and glass, and left, leaving Charlie sitting at the table with a half-eaten sandwich. He told her he was going to take a shower and try to look a little less depressed, then went to the bathroom without even apologizing. He didn't see the complete surprise on his wife's face when she realized that he had completely neglected her, making a quick dinner for himself, doing nothing for her until she asked, making her a crudely simple sandwich when they usually ate more elaborate meals, and leaving the table without a word of apology. Somewhere deep inside, she realized that she had no right to be indignant, but she couldn't understand why he was behaving this way. Of course, this couldn't be due to her recent affairs, since he didn't know about them. She was still sitting at the table with the remnants of her sandwich in front of her when he emerged from the bathroom 20 minutes later. He was freshly washed and shaved under his chin but still had 2 days' worth of stubble, which had been neatly trimmed. She couldn't resist. She always disdained bearded men. Why didn't you shave completely? Bobby shrugged. I don't know. Maybe I just want to shake up my life a little. I can't grow hair on my head anymore, so maybe I should grow a beard. It might make me feel like I have a little more testosterone. Beverly Jean likes bearded men. Is that why you're growing a beard even though you know I hate them? Bobby laughed. I don't know or care if Beverly Jean likes beards. I haven't shaved the last few days because I've been too depressed and just decided, while washing my face, that this might be a new look for me. I can always get rid of it at any time. As for whether you hate it or not, you haven't been attentive enough to me lately for it to matter. I've been patient, but with some recent discoveries, I've decided that I have to take care of myself first and then think about family. What do you mean by recent discoveries? Are you talking about Beverly Jean's diagnosis? This, along with other things, made me believe that our lives are not as safe as I thought. What seems okay today may not be so tomorrow. The things we consider sacred are just words on paper, which no longer have any meaning. Trust in other people is just a smokescreen leading to pain and betrayal. Bobby had to stop Charlie from realizing that he knew everything she was doing behind his back. It was better to let it simmer on its own. Charlie still insisted, what do you mean when you say trust is fleeting? I guess what I'm saying is that I can't trust anyone anymore. Someone close to me betrayed my trust, and I can no longer rely on that person to do what's best for me or our relationship. Charlie clearly thought it was someone at Bobby's work who had disappointed him. What can you do about this person? Can you fire him or her? Bobby made a sound of disdain. If only it were that easy. No, I have to think very seriously about how our relationship will be in the future. The only thing I know is that I can no longer trust this person. Everything he or she says or does will be under suspicion. Will you have to leave the company? If so, what will you do? I know we plan to retire early, but can we retire now? Bobby simply shook his head and turned away. She was so unaware he couldn't believe that Charlie couldn't see that she was the one he didn't trust anymore. She must be some kind of actress to keep pretending she still loves him while simultaneously cheating with the creep Ron Reynolds. Maybe she had a split personality, one person did not know what the other was doing. The rest of the evening passed without further drama. It seemed that both had declared a truce. The only disagreement occurred when they were getting ready to go to bed. Bobby got ready as usual, then lay down on his side of the bed, turning his back to Charlie. He really wasn't in the mood for pillow talk. Charlie, however, seemed to feel differently. She came to bed wearing sheer pajamas that Bobby had never seen before. She climbed onto her side of the bed and immediately snuggled up to her husband. Of course, she forgot that it was her coldness in bed that had caused this dry period. In literature, a man would always flip over and have revenge night to prove his masculinity, but this was real life. Bobby hadn't felt any intimate arousal since his world had fallen apart. He even thought about sitting down to pee, believing that peeing on the floor wouldn't make him any happier. Charlie gave it her best shot. He wasn't going to be the object of pity night. Hell, maybe she'd been talking to her lover about his behavior, and Ron had directed her to give Bobby some intim to distract him from suspicion. Whatever the reason for the sudden interest in their nightlife, it was too late for Charlie and Bobby. Perhaps, after Bobby had enough time to fully process his pain and had a chance to forgive, he would feel the spark of their old relationship again. But for now, it was too soon, given the feeling of betrayal of their vows to each other. He finally turned to Charlie. "Sorry, honey, but I can't get aroused. I don't know why, maybe it's because of Beverly Jean's illness and my trust issues, but I don't feel any intimate arousal. I know it's been a long time since we made love, but that can wait a little longer." With these words, he pushed Charlie's hands away from his chest. His shoulders were tense, and she could feel it. He was usually muscular, but today he seemed as hard as a rock. Charlie finally gave up and turned away, pretending to be asleep. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that part of his reaction was her fault, but damn it, she was trying to connect. She began to remember the last time he pestered her for a night. It had been so long ago, and she had been so busy trying to make Ron's last days full and joyful that she couldn't even remember how long it had been since they had made love. He said it had been months, but to her, it seemed like only a few weeks. While she was trying to figure out which of them was right in this matter, she fell asleep, but not soundly. She felt every movement, sound, and sigh her husband made as he tried to fall asleep. After sleeping in the office the night before, he should have been unconscious, but it seemed like he was also struggling to sleep. Finally, unconsciously, she turned to him again and hugged him. Then she fell into a deep sleep. Surprisingly, so did he. This tender act of love from his wife calmed him down and allowed him to rest for the first time that weekend. The next day was Charlie's day off. Bobby stood up and went through his usual morning routine, minus shaving his beard. He trimmed it again but left the rest. In a couple more days, he would go through the itchy period, then he would only have to decide how long to keep it, both in terms of time and length of the bristles. He quickly prepared a light breakfast since his appetite was still not up to par and then left without disturbing his wife, to whom he had been married for over 24 years. Charlie waited until Bobby had left for an hour before getting up. She showered thoroughly and shaved her legs. Since Bobby had failed in his marital duty last night, she didn't feel any guilt about making Ron happy. Yes, it was Ron's idea to give Bobby night out of pity, although he didn't put it that directly. When Charlie called him and told him how Bobby had been acting, he immediately went into protective mode and asked her to dispel any suspicions Bobby might have had before Ron's final days. He told her that his need for her now was great, and that thanks to her dedication, he could face his demise with strength and dignity. Charlie was so immersed in her role as a caregiver that she never questioned Ron's motives and tried to comply with his requests. Now she was getting ready to go comfort him in the only way he wanted, by being with him. She dressed carefully and then left the house, heading to his apartment. As always, he greeted her at the door with a kiss and a hug. He was wearing the same pajamas as the last time she had been with him on Saturday afternoon. She immediately assumed he was too weak to change clothes and take regular baths. She took control, undressing him and leading him into the shower, then changed the sheets. Yes, she decided he had been sleeping on the same sheets since they had an intim on Saturday. Unknown to her, another person had occupied this bed on Sunday. After the shower, Ron told Charlie that it was refreshing and made him 100% better and stronger. Maybe he needed someone to help him every day until he couldn't take care of himself anymore. Charlie agreed and wondered if she could take time off to care for Ron in his final days. It didn't even occur to her to ask if he was in hospice care or had even thought about it. Also unknown to Charlie, someone was following her from her house to Ron's apartment. The notes were recorded in a computer file on a tablet, along with photographs. Additionally, while Ron was at the pub on Sunday bragging to his friends about his latest exploits, Spence's friend entered Ron's house and installed micro cameras in various places, including the bedrooms and bathrooms. The laptop that served as a recorder was hidden in a closet and recorded all the cameras with sound. All of them were activated by voice and movement to save space on the laptop's hard drive. The investigator quickly and quietly searched Ron's apartment, looking for evidence of his involvement with different women. He found a list of women on a piece of paper in Ron's desk. Since Ron didn't have a computer at home, he also found a digital camera and quickly looked through the memory card, finding many photos of different women. Most of them were not in compromising positions, but he made a copy of everything. Ron also left his phone on the table when he went to the bar, and a new person in the group, another friend of Spence's, secretly took it, cloned it, and then returned it to its original place. Now, the three men and their investigators also knew who Ron called and when, and what was said. The collection of information had begun. The investigator had already found valuable information in Charlie and Ron's conversation about Bobby's emotional state and their plans to meet on Monday morning. Dossiers were prepared for each woman on Ron's list. If photographs could be found, they were matched to those on Ron's camera. Even if there weren't any incriminating photos, the fact that they were taken in Ron's apartment wouldn't look good to a significant other. Charlie and Ron, not knowing they were now the stars of a video, lay down on the fresh bed. Ron exclaimed how cute and wonderful Charlie looked with her new hairstyle. Ron didn't really care, he smiled and shrugged. "Baby, you make me lose control. You make me so happy that I wish you could stay with me until the very end. Sorry for that bite with a little makeup. He might not notice. Besides, you're not having a night with him, and he didn't even touch you last night. Are you sure he's not getting a little something on the side?" Charlie pulled away sharply. "He would never cheat on me, just like I would never cheat on him." Ron smiled again. The power of self-deception was so evident in these women he seduced. They believed so much that they were simply comforting a dying man that they justified any of their actions and firmly believed they were not cheating on their husbands. He calmed her down, and then they made love again. After they finished, Charlie prepared a light lunch for them before heading out to do some shopping for her house and for Ron. She then returned and prepared dinner for Ron to heat up in the evening. Then she went home, changed her clothes, and went for a long walk. Meanwhile, Bobby went to work and quickly dealt with his current affairs. He then called Beverly Jean and told her what happened with Charlie and how it might affect her. Beverly Jean was understandably upset to learn she had terminal cancer, so Bobby spent a lot of time explaining his depression and feelings. While he was telling his girlfriend everything that had happened over the weekend, the stress finally got the better of him, and he burst into tears, realizing how much he had been hurt by her betrayal. Beverly Jean immediately begged Bobby to come and meet her for lunch so she could comfort him in person. Bobby agreed and hung up. After he regained control, he drove across town to a small lounge that served great lunches and was just a few steps from their home office. During lunch, Beverly Jean agreed with Bobby's idea and also reported this to her husband. When they broke up, she hoped that Charlie and Bobby could find a way to overcome this scandal. She knew it would be difficult. Bobby returned to the office and checked that there was nothing important left requiring his attention. His assistant kept an eye on the small details that still needed to be completed in the project. His professional life was well-ordered and, for the moment, predictable. His personal life was in ruins. He sat and thought about his options. He had to start a new project, but the initial stages involved clearing the area and excavating before the foundations could be dug. At this stage, his presence was not necessary. Maybe he should take a vacation. He hadn't rested for a long time. Maybe even take Charlie somewhere so they could reconnect. That was the thought. Somehow, he needed to take control of his personal life. He couldn't continue in this state. While he was contemplating getting away for a while, he received a call from Troy Davis, an old friend of his who wanted to update him on the information collected on Mr. Ron Reynolds. They were compiling a list of women who might have been involved with him recently. Significant others were also being monitored. Bobby hoped to find at least 5 or 6 women who would risk their relationships to have a night with Ron Reynolds. When Charlie was presented with proof of her actions, he wanted her to understand that others had done the same thing. He wanted her to realize that she wasn't helping a dying man, she was just dealing with a creep looking for free intim. After discussing their common problem, the two moved on to talk about other things. Bobby mentioned that the building project was almost completed and that he was thinking about taking a vacation and moving away. Troy agreed with Bobby's assessment of his personal needs. He wouldn't be of any use to anyone if he became increasingly depressed because of the situation Charlie put him in. Troy then started talking about his business. He owned a small transport company that primarily did local shipping. Some of his clients asked him to take on large loads and travel around the country. He had a few trucks but not enough drivers to see if it would be profitable. Bobby understood his dilemma. Finding good, skilled workers has always been a problem. Too many people went to study for almost useless specialties, and few chose technical schools, which were in great demand. He remembered working as a truck driver, usually on small trucks but sometimes on larger ones, while earning money for his studies. Suddenly, he had an idea. "Hey, how about I train a little and get my CDL back? I could help you and get away from here for a while at the same time." Troy laughed. "I agree, you need a vacation, but why do you want to drive a truck?" Bobby replied, "It would be some kind of work therapy. I'll leave here for a while, and you'll get a temporary driver." "What about Charlie?" "I don't think she'll consider riding in a big truck a vacation." "Well, with everything that's going on, I'll probably give her one chance to go on a long vacation with me. If she doesn't take that opportunity, I'll get in your truck and drive across the country for a while. If and when I get back, we can sit down and decide what the future holds." Troy was still skeptical, but he would welcome the opportunity to have a temporary full-time driver to see if this aspect of the company would be profitable. They ended the conversation, and Bobby sat down and thought about his idea. Damn it, why not? He called his boss and briefly outlined his current personal problems and what he felt he needed to do for his peace of mind. They developed a plan to get the new project started without delays. He spent the rest of the day in conference with his assistant, outlining the necessary work. By the end of the day, they had a workable plan, and although the company didn't want to risk Bobby leaving, they reluctantly gave their blessing for his leave. Bobby left the office feeling a little more in control of his life. If nothing good happened, he would at least give his marriage one last chance. He just wanted to shake Charlie and make her admit that what she did was wrong. Nothing could move forward until she admitted it. Maybe marriage counseling would be the answer, but she still had to admit that she had damaged their relationship. If not, he could get away from here for a while and find his own healing before moving on to the next stage of his life, both personal and professional. His daughter, Chelsea, was waiting for him when he returned home. She was full of news about her trip to several colleges. They discussed various pros and cons. Chelsea was actually leaning towards going to the same college as Greg, her brother. The campus was 2 hours away, so it wasn't too far, but it was far enough that they could feel like adults making their own decisions. Having both on the same campus would allow Bobby and Charlie to attend without being torn between 2 different universities. The college was large enough that Greg and Chelsea didn't see each other every day but allowed them to support each other when needed. Chelsea then brought up the topic of an anniversary surprise. "How are we going to hide what we're planning from Mom? How are we going to get her to the banquet hall without telling her what's going on? The whole family will be there, and that'll be a clue when she walks in." Bobby was confused. He wanted to tell his daughter what happened over the weekend while she was away, but at the same time, turning 24 was a reason to celebrate after all, especially since all 3 of his wonderful children were looking forward to celebrating this milestone. He was also inclined to shock Charlie in front of her family and friends so that she would not have the opportunity to turn the situation in her favor. He hoped that the complete condemnation of others would help bring her to her senses. He had an idea. "Hey, since my project is almost finished, why don't I ask my boss to play along and pretend that I'm getting a reward for completing the project on time? That way, we'll have a reason to celebrate, and we can seat my colleagues at some of the tables. When your mom and I arrive, we could sit at the front table facing the stage so she won't notice the family coming." Then we can give her the whole surprise." Chelsea jumped for joy and clapped her hands. "Great idea, Dad. Do you think your boss will agree?" "Well, we get along well, and I actually completed the project on time. After all, he just needs to agree to the idea, and we can organize everything ourselves. Aren't he and his wife on the invite list?" "I think so." "It should be." "So you gave me your list, and we matched it with my mother's list. Aren't you inviting someone from the hospital staff?" Bobby nodded. He had forgotten about it. "Well, we can say that some of her colleagues should be invited too, since the company wants to recognize not only me but also my loving family who supports me while I earn money for the company. This might work. Dad, I'll call the people we invited and ask them to act surprised if Mom says something." Once they had that part sorted out, they checked the list of what else needed to be done. Bobby came up with another idea. "Why don't we make a video or slide presentation that talks about our life together? We could find old photos from when we met, through our wedding, the birth, and growing up of the three of you, up to today. It could start playing when we give her the surprise." Chelsea nodded. "I've already thought about this and started looking for photos to scan. Do you have any old movies or videos that I can add?" Bobby asked. "Yes, we have old VHS tapes from the beginning of our marriage," she replied. "I'll look for them after Mom is asleep. We'll need to digitize them quickly. I know a place in town that does this. We've used their services for work many times." Chelsea couldn't help but make a joke. "This isn't an adult film, I hope? I mean, you and your mom look good, but I don't think my innocent mind can handle it." Bobby laughed. "If there's something like that out there, I'll keep it just for us." At that moment, they heard Charlie's car drive into the garage. Father and daughter quickly hid their lists and continued discussing colleges as Charlie brought in her purchases. Bobby noticed that Charlie was walking a bit awkwardly. He had to control himself and try to look calm as he went to the car and brought in the remaining groceries. When he returned, they resumed their college discussion, with Chelsea expressing her desire to attend the same college as Greg. Bobby sadly thought that it might be better if he and Charlie did divorce so that the younger ones could support each other. He didn't like the idea of using the anniversary celebration to reveal Charlie's unfaithfulness, as it could hurt his relationship with the children, but he wanted to ensure she had no way to justify it. He hoped that in time, the children would understand and forgive him. Smiling forcefully, he rejoined the women of his family. He was able to forget about his problems for a while as Chelsea happily talked about her experiences over the weekend. Dinner was also a success. During the meal, he announced that he would be receiving an award for his service to the company on the 29th and that Charlie was expected to attend with him. He had already checked, and that evening was her day off. Charlie did not hesitate and agreed, saying she would need to buy a new chic dress for the occasion. Bobby wondered if she had forgotten about their anniversary. Her birthday was just a few days before their anniversary, and she never forgot that. If she forgot this too, he would have even more reason to despair about the future of their marriage. Time would tell. Bobby simply put on his boxers, something he almost never did since he preferred to sleep without anything, and turned his back to his wife. The rest of the week passed slowly. Every evening, Charlie returned home, sometimes on time, sometimes a little late. Bobby never asked where she was. He knew from the investigator that she visited Ron's apartment every 2 or 3 days for healing. On other nights, Ron allowed other women to comfort him in his final days of health. Bobby had his silver anniversary gift ordered and engraved. Chelsea and he also worked on a PowerPoint presentation that would play in the background during the ceremony. The only change this week was that Charlie picked up a part-time job. She detailed how a new nurse had become mentally unstable after the death of a child and had to take several days off work. Bobby agreed that she should help those who were suffering, but personally, he wondered if she cared about his suffering as much. The investigator said Charlie had consoled Ron so he wouldn't feel too depressed about his impending death from cancer. She had been intimate with him so often that he must not have had any thoughts of death, unless it was from being overwhelmed. Bobby became more depressed. Chelsea noticed this and kept asking him what was wrong, but he couldn't bring himself to ruin his daughter's happiness at that moment. It would be quite difficult to address it after the holiday. Bobby took a few hours of free time every day to practice driving a truck. It took a while since it had been decades since he had driven, but his old instincts and reflexes returned. After finding a doctor who only performed medical exams for obtaining a CDL, he was surprised at how some doctors would let anyone drive. He passed the licensing exam. Troy was still skeptical about Bobby driving for him, as he had hoped the pair would make up after their confrontation. However, Troy was realistic and welcomed the temporary driver to his team. Bobby tried to get Charlie to agree to take at least 3 weeks off after the awards ceremony, but Charlie flatly refused, citing work commitments. In her heart, she was afraid that if she left, Ron might die before she returned. She thought Bobby was selfish for wanting her to be away for such a long time and justified herself by saying she would make it up to him after Ron died. Bobby's birthday passed, and Charlie didn't even remember it. No card, no gift, no special breakfast, no treat, no night, no dinner, nothing from her, not even a kiss on the cheek and a happy birthday, darling. She was so caught up in her relationship with Ron that she hadn't even noticed the calls from the boys congratulating Bobby or Chelsea's card on the breakfast table. That day, Bobby became increasingly gloomy, and his desperation turned to anger, a slow but steady process. He lost his appetite, and his sleep was so disrupted that after many nights of tossing and turning in bed, he finally got up and slept in a chair. Charlie didn't seem to notice. Finally, the 29th arrived. It was a wonderful Saturday. Charlie was nervous at home. She had finally bought a dress for the holiday. Ted and Greg returned home for the event, which she hadn't expected. Ted even brought a girl named Gretchen, who was not only beautiful but also had a pleasant personality. Charlie was nervous because Ron had contacted her and asked her to come see him that day. Since it was her day off, she couldn't find a good excuse to leave the house with so many people around, which irritated her greatly. She was so upset that she risked damaging her relationship with her son Ted by being harsh with Gretchen. Ted was not a man who would tolerate such an attitude and responded to her with harshness. Charlie suddenly burst into tears, ran out of the house, and drove away. She went straight to Ron's place to console him. His last messages had sounded like he was a lost and scared boy, not a grown man facing dark times. She knocked on his door for a long time, but he did not answer. Fearing the worst, she used the key he had given her and entered the apartment. Ron wasn't there. She checked everything but found nothing suspicious. Maybe he went to the hospital. She checked the reception desk at the hospital he usually visited, but he wasn't there. She even checked the emergency room to ensure he hadn't been taken there before being admitted again. He was gone. When she tried to call him, the phone went to voicemail. Not knowing any of his friends or family, she couldn't contact them, so she finally admitted defeat and returned home. She was a little less irritable and even tried to apologize for her behavior. Finally, everyone was ready to go to the celebration. They ate a small dinner before getting ready and then headed to the hotel where the event was taking place. When they arrived, they were ushered to a place of honor at the front of the room. The children were sitting at the table behind them. As they sat down, Bobby turned to them and whispered, "Forgive me for what I'm going to do tonight. You don't deserve what and how I'm going to humiliate you. I hope someday you will understand and forgive me. I really love you three. You are everything a father could want in his children. I also hope that you will forgive your mother after I reveal what she did. She's your mother and a good mother." He quickly turned and sat down before the stunned trio could ask or answer. Charlie didn't even think about why they were sitting facing the table of honor. Usually, the guests of honor were seated so that they could see everyone and so that everyone could see them and their hosts. In this case, they were sitting at the front table, facing the table where Bobby's bosses were sitting. There were many people in the room that Charlie had never met, but she assumed they were Bobby's colleagues whom she had not yet had the opportunity to meet. She figured she would meet some of them after the awards ceremony. Since Charlie and Bobby were sitting facing the front of the room, they did not see the others enter. These were some of Charlie's colleagues and members of her family. Since Bobby had no siblings and his parents had died many years ago, none of his family was present. They all thought they were attending a surprise 25th wedding anniversary celebration. There were plates of canapés and other snacks on the tables, and drinks were ordered and served. Finally, the owner of the company stood up and began to speak. He described Bobby's value to the organization, including a brief history of when he was hired and the projects he had completed, culminating in his most recent one. He ended his speech by thanking Charlie and the children for their sacrifices and support, which enabled Bobby to be successful in the company. He then asked Bobby to stand up and make a speech. As Bobby approached the table, a presentation began on the screen behind him. It started with photographs of Bobby and Charlie as children. By the time he took the microphone, the screen already displayed pictures of their student years when they were dating. Bobby began his speech. "Charlie, I fell in love with you at first sight. When you smiled at me, your smile lit up the whole room, and everyone around me started smiling too. You completed me. When I asked you to marry me, I was on top of the world." With these words, a photograph of their wedding appeared on the screen. He continued, "You were so beautiful that day that it took my breath away. If we had not known each other biblically before that day, I may never have had the courage to truly make you my loving wife." He paused, and a photo of Ted as a baby appeared on the screen. "You gave me a son, Ted. He was perfect. He grew up to be a strong and loving boy, always so helpful, and it shows now that he is a teacher in a challenging school where he makes a difference in the lives of many people." The photographs showed Ted growing into a man as Bobby spoke. Then a photo of Greg as a baby appeared on the screen. Our second child, Greg, was also a beautiful baby. He grew up to be handsome and popular, just like his brother. He is more technically minded, and I am confident he will succeed in whatever he sets his mind to. The slideshow showed Greg growing up and becoming a young man in college. Then it was Chelsea's turn, Bobby continued, and then came my daughter Chelsea, who is graduating from high school and will soon move on to the next chapter of her life. She is my favorite daughter, and I know with her kind and caring attitude, she will be successful in her life too. Many family photographs from holidays and vacations quickly replaced each other on the screen. Then there was a photo of Charlie graduating from nursing school about 12 years ago. Charlie decided that the kids were old enough and went back to school to get her nursing degree. I fully supported her as she has always been a kind and caring soul who wanted to help people. 10 years ago, she graduated from school and became a midwife at Washington General, where I believe she still works. Charlie looked at Bobby when he said he thought she was still working there. She had watched the slideshow up to this point, trying to understand where it was leading. Suddenly, she realized Bobby continued, "I was so happy that a few weeks ago, I thought that, like God on the seventh day, I could rest and the rest of my life would be calm and uncomplicated, with my loving wife always by my side. I was looking forward to today, our 25th wedding anniversary. I'd like to say it's been 25 years of bliss, but the last few weeks have turned it into a joke." Bobby went on, "Until I went to the pub for a drink while Charlie was at work. The last slide Chelsea prepared said happy 25th anniversary. That day, I overheard a conversation that changed my life. A man was sitting at a table with a few of my friends and others, talking about his new girlfriend and how he managed to get her. At this signal, a slight movement began in the back of the hall. The handcuffed man was led into the hall by Bobby's friends, Troy and Spence, with the help of a couple of strangers. The handcuffed man was seated next to Charlie and ordered to sit quietly. He looked a little beaten up, with bruises on his face. It was Ron. A photograph of Ron appeared on the screen, entertaining a group of people at the bar. Charlie was stunned by the sight of Ron and the photo on the screen. Bobby continued, "This man, Ron Reynolds, was telling his friends how he seduced women, especially married women, by pretending he had terminal cancer and only had weeks or months to live. He then described a birthmark on his new girlfriend that only someone could have had." Charlie, Bobby paused, and a photo of Charlie walking out of Ron's apartment with his hand on her buttock appeared on the screen. "Charlie," he continued, "I overheard him talking about you." Disapproving sounds came from behind her. She turned around to see the shocked faces of her family, especially her parents, looking at the screen. When she turned back, there was a small brightly packaged box in front of her. She picked it up mechanically, shocked and confused, not knowing what to say. At this moment, Bobby wasn't finished. The screen started playing a video as part of the presentation. It was obviously heavily edited, with some parts blurred out, but it was clear that it depicted Charlie and Ron in intimate moments. The video was short. Bobby looked at his wife and said, "Charlie, I believe you really thought Ron was dying. Why you didn't question why he wasn't on any medication or in hospice care is beyond me. I know he asked you not to have a night while he was alive, but you went months without allowing us any expression of love. I also know that when you finally asked about my depression, your lover advised you to give me for an intimate out of pity. But I was already so depressed that I couldn't accept intim from you out of pity." Charlie shook her head. This couldn't be true. She couldn't forget their anniversary, let alone such an important event as their silver wedding. She was simply trying to help a dying man in his last days. "I tried to give you a hint about what was going on by telling you a story about a friend dying of cancer. By the way, the story was made up, but you didn't care. You just asked if I was sleeping with her. I also tried to persuade you to go with me after tonight, but you refused. You refused because of Ron, didn't you?" Charlie nodded silently. Bobby continued, "Even today, you were nervous because Ron wanted you to come to him, weren't you? You wanted to leave your family for your lover on our wedding anniversary, but he wasn't home, right?" Charlie nodded again. "Your friend Ron was with Troy and Spence, getting a lesson about not sleeping with other men's wives. The screen began to show Ron with other women in his apartment. With each photo, the women and their husbands began to argue. By the way, while your dying friend had you, he was also sleeping with and lying to other women. Each of these women is here today with their significant others. I asked each man to see something that would change his relationship. They all came thinking that something good would happen, but it won't." He turned to the men surrounding the table of honor. "You have been placed in strategic locations so that you can see and reach your wife's lover. I have no intention of physically harming Ron, he will soon be out of a job. But if you want meaningful punishment, my friends will uncuff him and give him a little head start so you can ask him all the questions you want." All the men stopped shouting at their wives and lovers and turned beastly glances at Ron. Ron knew he was done for. If he wasn't protected, he started begging. "Bobby, I know what I did was wrong, but these guys will kill me. You can't let them do that. You said it yourself, you don't want to hurt me physically." Bobby smiled at his enemy. "You are a fool. You laughed at me and at these other men. You bragged about what you were doing to us. You told all your friends to do the same. I may not touch you, but don't think that I don't want to hurt you. You slept with my wife and ruined my marriage, along with my manhood. You deserve everything that's coming to you." He nodded to Troy. Troy immediately released Ron. Ron looked back and ran to the back exit. Bobby thought this was a bad move since he had to fight his way through the men standing between him and the exit. Several quick and agile men grabbed him, and the crowd carried him outside. Bobby continued his speech. "Charlie, I asked you to go on vacation with me, but you flatly refused. You said you were too needed here. I contacted your boss to find out how many extra hours you worked. I was surprised to find that not only did the records show you didn't take extra hours, but also that you didn't show up for work several times and left early. Some of your colleagues are here today, but not your boss. She's extremely disappointed with you." Charlie just nodded and lowered her head. "Charlie, I want you to see a psychologist. Something is wrong in your head if you allowed this idiot to destroy our marriage so easily. A few weeks ago, you said that you loved me. I dread to think what you would do to me if I hated you. Everything I asked was rejected. You forgot our anniversary. You forgot my birthday. Your whole being was consumed by your need to help a dying man who deceived you." He turned to his children. "I asked for your forgiveness before. I'm sorry for what I did to you, you certainly didn't deserve it." He looked at Charlie's family and friends. "I also ask for your forgiveness. I could have shown the unedited videos and pictures of Charlie cheating, but I only wanted you to know what was going on, not to rub your nose in it or hers. I want her to get the help I obviously cannot provide. I also wanted you all to know the truth about her actions over the past month so that she cannot distort or belittle her actions." He looked at his wife again. "Please open the gift I gave you." Charlie was crying and barely heard him. She was trying to figure out how to explain to him and everyone else her need to help the poor dying man. She never cheated on her husband. She opened the small box, expecting to see a ring or some kind of jewelry. Instead, there was a silver bullet. The engraving on the shell was so small and her eyes were full of tears that she couldn't read it. She looked up in bewilderment. On the screen was an enlarged photograph of the bullet. Everyone in the room could easily read the inscription, "Next time use this. It will hurt less." Bobby continued, "Now for the future. Charlie, I still love you. You destroyed me, but I still love you. I will cherish every day of our 24 years of marriage. However, I am taking an indefinite leave of absence from work. I got my CDL and will travel around the country. I don't know when I will return to the city. It will most likely be months, as I need space and distance from you. I left my mobile phone at home, and I will give the number to the children. Please don't try to get it from them. If you manage to do so, I will just throw it away and get another number. Then I will not contact the children either. When I decide to return to the city, I will contact you. If you get good psychological help and therapy, we may have a chance. If not, then you can divorce me for leaving, as I will no longer have contact with you." He paused to let his words sink in. "I have already changed my will and the beneficiaries of my pension and insurance policies. All the money will go to the children, with the condition that they will never give you a penny. Any psychological help will be paid for, that has already been arranged." He put down the microphone and walked over to the table where Charlie was sitting, still trying to figure out how to respond. Finally, she spoke, "You are so selfish. I was trying to comfort a dying man, and you just wanted me to be all yours. How dare you?" Bobby looked at her sadly. "As I expected, you've completely lost touch with reality, and I'm losing mine. Goodbye, Charlie." Bobby left the hall and headed outside. He left the car keys with the doorman so the kids could leave when they were ready. There was a loaded truck parked next to the hotel. By morning, he would be 2 states away on his way to his first delivery. Troy was already planning his next load. They agreed that he would not be sent back to this city for many months. Charlie's friends came over and told her to get her head in order. Bobby never did anything to deserve her attitude or behavior and was the most unselfish person they knew. Then they left. Most of Charlie's family came over and told her to get help. Her father simply asked her, "What the hell?" before turning and leaving. He couldn't believe it was his daughter. Her mother was beginning to show her age, and this evening was almost more than she could bear. She cried because of her daughter's stupidity and could only stand and shake her head, trying to console and instruct her child. Ted, Greg, and Chelsea were still in shock. They had planned and executed a beautiful celebration, but their father hijacked it for his own purposes. They were very angry with him. They all felt that the minimum he could do was either allow the celebration to take place and then cause a scandal in private, or let them in on his plans. Now, they could only stand and look at their mother, who seemed to be in her own world, which had nothing to do with reality. Finally, Chelsea approached her mother. "Mom, let's go home. There's been enough trauma tonight. We need to get out of here." Charlie looked around. Where was Bobby? Where was Ron? She said nothing as she was let out, holding her 25th anniversary gift. Gretchen asked the strange question, "We came with Bobby. How will we get home?" Greg immediately took command. "If he hasn't left the car, we'll call a taxi." "No problem." As they approached the exit, the doorman asked for their last name. When Greg replied that they were the Carlsons, the doorman handed them the car keys. One gentleman left these for his family. "Must be a good person." Greg nodded. Ted seemed ready to say something sarcastic, as he was very angry with his father. Charlie just kept crying. Chelsea had just walked her mother out to the car. The trip home was uneventful. When they opened the garage door, Charlie's car was there. What did Bobby drive off with? Did he go somewhere on foot? They entered the house. Something was wrong, but it took a while to figure out what it was. Finally, Chelsea exclaimed, "Daddy's everything is gone." Several photographs on the wall were missing. His clothes were gone from the bedroom. His coats were missing from the hallway. His office was empty. Someone had carefully removed all reminders of his presence while they were at the anniversary celebration. He really left. Even Ted was depressed now. He might have been angry at his father for the way he had exposed Charlie's infidelity, but he had been a good father, and now he was gone. Charlie walked around the house, telling everyone exactly what had disappeared. She seemed a little distracted as she described every item that belonged to Bobby. Suddenly, she announced that she had to make a call. When Chelsea asked who she was going to call, Charlie said she had to call Ron and make sure he was okay. "I may have to go to him after all. He is a very sick man and needs me to ease his pain." Chelsea tried to reason with her mother, but she brushed her off. Charlie took out her cell phone and called Ron. After many beeps, he finally answered. "Listen, I know it's you, Charlie. Haven't you done enough already? Your husband outed me today. Other guys beat me up, and my boss called and said I was fired. For what did I do? I'm in the hospital recovering and don't need your help. Leave me alone." He hung up before she could find the words. Charlie couldn't believe it. She had helped him feel better, and now he tells her to leave him alone. She thought for a moment that he might be delirious from his illness before remembering that Bobby had discovered Ron was a fraud. He was just pretending to be sick to get a night. This realization brought her back to reality. Bobby was angry with her and wasn't home. She had forgotten his birthday and their anniversary. She looked at her hand. She still held the silver bullet. It occurred to her that maybe there was a gun in the house that could fire this bullet. Maybe it would solve her problems. Just use the bullet. Isn't that what Bobby wanted her to use the bullet for? Yes, a new chapter in his life. Bobby was on the road learning to drive a truck. The ride itself was easy, the truck was easy to drive, and the terminals were usually easy to find. GPS had really helped and changed the way the industry operates. The paper logbook was replaced with an electronic one. Satellite systems controlled the truck's speed and monitored its performance. No, the most difficult part was the mandatory rest periods. When he stopped to rest in a parking lot or gas station, he had nothing to do but think about Charlie. He wanted to know how she was doing. He wanted to know if his children had forgiven him. He had been away for 8 weeks and had resisted the urge to call his children or home because he didn't know how his interest would be received or whether it would be reciprocated. Perhaps they all wanted nothing to do with him. Troy kept in touch. After all, he was Bobby's boss now. Troy kept Bobby's work a secret. He said Greg called once to get information, but only once. The others were silent. Troy found out that Charlie returned to work a few days after the anniversary but then completely broke down and was hospitalized for constant observation. She was now in an inpatient psychiatric unit with suicidal thoughts. Rumors said that she showed people the bullet and asked what kind of weapon it would fire. When staff tried to take the bullet away, she became hysterical and fought to keep it, shouting that it was an anniversary gift from her husband. When Bobby heard the news, he was sad and grateful at the same time. This meant that Charlie would get the help she needed. However, since she was not working, financial difficulties could arise in the Carlson household. He immediately sent Troy a power of attorney form and transferred money to their bank account so the day-to-day bills could be paid. He also opened an account for the children and transferred money there. He sent them text messages with account numbers and details. He received 2 very short responses from Ted and Greg. The response from Chelsea almost brought him to tears. His daughter was alone and trying to keep her life in order. He sent Troy to help her. He then left the rest area and drove another 400 miles to his next delivery. Thanks to regular updates from Troy, he learned that Charlie was improving. Chelsea graduated from high school and still planned to go to college, but to a campus closer to home so she could be near her mother. Greg was so upset that he almost didn't finish the semester, but with a little help from his study group, he pulled himself together and passed his exams. Ted found solace in his students. Even Gretchen seemed to be pushed out of his life as he focused on helping his weaker students succeed. Bobby was upset about all of this. He was getting better, but it seemed that his family was suffering more and more. By then, 6 months had passed. Maybe it was time to visit the house, or at least his hometown. He didn't feel like he had a home other than the cab of the truck. He asked Troy to find loads that would allow him to drive home. It took a couple of weeks, but then he went home for a break. He arrived at sunset and handed over the truck. Troy met him, and they went to dinner. Troy told him what was going on. The project that Bobby had left in the hands of his assistant was going well. The foundations were poured, and all excavation work was completed. The summer had been rainy, so the project was slightly delayed. Charlie was at home and working part-time as a nurse, but no longer on the OB ward. During treatment, it turned out that several babies had died immediately after birth, and she took it hard. She held on, but the psychiatrist believed that this trauma was the catalyst for her thinking that she could ease Ron's final days. This trauma was also the reason why she completely rejected her husband. Her husband was healthy and did not need anyone in her opinion. Bobby was healthy and didn't need anyone. Even now, it seemed to the family that Bobby was healthy and did not need them. Their anger was directed at this. It seemed like he didn't need them at all. Charlie still had difficulty sleeping because she slept alone. She hadn't slept alone since college. Troy took care of all the bills. Chelsea figured out he had power of attorney and came to him in an attempt to find Bobby. But Troy respected his friend's need for healing and understanding. Now, it seemed that the time had come for closure. Bobby asked Troy to take him to a nice motel. He also rented a car. Bobby drove past the house and then took a position to watch it discreetly. Although he trusted Troy, Bobby did not arrange for Charlie to be followed. How could he know? Maybe she had found a new lover, and Troy was feeding him phony stories. After all, he had trusted his wife for 25 years, and it was only an overheard conversation with some man that revealed the truth to him. Bobby watched every morning while Chelsea left for school. Sometimes Charlie left early for work. He followed her to the hospital and then returned and followed her as she left work. Sometimes she went to the grocery store, but most of the time, she went straight home. On the rare days she had off, she would leave the house and walk along the large trails in a nearby park for a couple of hours. She looked good but was constantly sad. He began to believe that she was pining for him until one evening when women he believed were her colleagues came to her house. About half an hour later, the group came out, leading Charlie to a car. She seemed reluctant to go with them. He followed them to a local bar. It wasn't too noisy outside. The women dragged Charlie inside. Bobby decided to go in and see for himself what was going on. He hoped they were trying to cheer her up and not putting her in the same situation where she met that man, Ron. By the way, nothing had been heard from Ron since he was admitted to the hospital. According to rumors, the men who had overtaken him not only damaged his manhood but also made it clear that he had no place in the area. A couple of his friends had also gone with him. Bobby entered the bar. It was partially filled with mostly middle-aged people. The place did not attract young people. There was a DJ, but the music was muffled. The small dance floor was not crowded, even though it was already around 10 p.m. He ordered a beer and sat down at a table alone. If he turned his head a little, he could see the table where the women were sitting. He was too far away to hear their conversations, but he didn't need to hear them to know that they were trying to set Charlie up with different men. Charlie shook her head at every gesture. Bobby drank his beer slowly. Nobody approached him. Maybe it was the leather jacket along with his bald head, or maybe it was the beard he had grown, or the expression on his face. He was sad, and it showed. Anyone looking for a good time wouldn't choose him as a partner. He ordered a new beer and whiskey. He sipped his beer and pondered the amber drink in front of him. Suddenly, a shadow appeared over his shoulder. He looked up to see one of the women from the table where Charlie was sitting. She asked if she could sit down. Surprised, he kindly pointed to the chair in front of him. "Look, my friends and I were sitting at that table, and we noticed that you were alone. Frankly, you looked like you'd lost your best friend. We were all discussing why you might be alone, and I decided to take the bull by the horns and come and ask you." Bobby smiled at the woman. She was about 35 years old, well-groomed, with blonde hair and a slender body. He also noticed a wedding ring on her left hand. He hoped she wasn't looking for adventure. Enough marriages and relationships had been destroyed because of him lately. He decided to play along a little. Ron was right, if you put a lost puppy expression on your face, some woman would want to fix it. "My name is Robert." "What's your name?" "My name is Lisa. We're all nurses at St. Paul's Hospital." We were just having a good time when we spotted you and decided we had to find out what was making you so upset. Well, Lisa, the truth is that my wife cheated on me. I found out and left home. I'm currently living in a motel, trying to figure out what to do. I haven't made a decision yet and have been living alone for months. In fact, the beer I drank before you came was the first I've had since all this started. This beer is the second, and the whiskey is the first I've even thought about since it all began. Oh my God, Robert. What woman could do this to you? Did you beat her, or did you get drunk all the time? He smiled sadly. I could tell you anything, even feed you complete nonsense, and you wouldn't know whether it was true or not. Let's just say I thought we had a great marriage until it was gone. I never laid a hand on a woman if she didn't want it. I didn't even touch her lover. I just made his life hell, and I think he's no longer in the picture. He sipped his whiskey. Now, what do you think you can do to make me feel better? Offer me for intimate? But I noticed the rings on your finger. I don't think you should think about helping me in any way. Lisa looked at her finger. You're probably right. I was going to offer you conversation and company, but I understand where that might lead. In fact, my friend at the table started a relationship with a man who wasn't her husband. She tells us she thought about helping a dying person and lost her husband in the process. She stood up and walked away from the table. Bobby didn't look after her. The view might have been nice, but he wasn't interested. A few minutes later, another woman approached the table and asked if she could sit down. Bobby motioned her to a chair. Once she was settled, she introduced herself. Robert, my name is Terry. I'm with Lisa and the others. I am, however, single and would like to talk to you for a few minutes, if I may. Bobby called the waitress over for more beer and whiskey and offered something for Terry. They sat in silence for several minutes until the drinks arrived. Terry raised her glass to show her friends, which seemed like a sign of progress when the victim bought a drink. Bobby smiled back at her. They started a light conversation. Bobby told her that he had been away for a while, trying to figure out what to do. He had had no contact with his unfaithful wife during this time and did not know whether she even wanted to reconcile. Terry made appropriate comments, expressing that she understood and was confident that Robert's wife was repentant and ready for reconciliation. Bobby leaned forward. Why are you so sure of this? Is it a woman's intuition, or are you just standing on the side of every woman who cheated? If you don't know me or my wife, how can you be so sure that she wants to come back to me? She could be with another man by now, perhaps even with a whole bunch. I don't know her intentions or interests, so how can you be so sure? Terry was stunned. She tried to find the right words to console the suffering man, but he attacked her. She responded, I was just trying to make you feel a little better. I thought you wanted to hear that your wife was looking forward to seeing you. If that's how you interact with her, maybe she was right to cheat on you. So you think there's an excuse for cheating? Is it okay as long as the man has strong feelings about something? If she was upset with me for some reason, why not try to work it out? If she was ready to end things with me, why not say so before sleeping with some idiot? I would have been hurt, but not as much as finding out she didn't stay faithful to me, her husband of over 20 years. Instead, some man she met in a bar became her priority. She only had a night with him from that moment on. He stopped, wiped his face, and then took another drink. I'm going to the restroom. I don't think I'm feeling any better despite your best intentions. I think our conversation is over, and I'd like to be alone when I get back. Bobby did what he said. He went to the bathroom, emptied his bladder, splashed water on his face, and looked at himself in the cracked mirror above the sink. His face seemed to be frozen in a permanent frown. It wasn't just sadness, he didn't even feel angry except at the inappropriate help the women were trying to provide. He sighed and returned to his table. As expected, he was now alone. He shrugged. It seemed he was always alone, even when surrounded by patrons at the bar. He was alone on his makeshift island. He wondered if Charlie felt the same way. When he sat down, he glanced at the table of women. Charlie didn't look in his direction. She was distracted by one of the women. While most of the others glared at him, he grinned at them as he sat back down. There was already a new drink in front of him. He wondered who ordered it but soon found out. Again, a shadow appeared to his left. Another nurse came to help him. He looked up, but this time he didn't offer her a chair. "Well, you must be the ghost of Christmas future. How are you going to help me improve my life? What words of wisdom do you have to help me with my personal crisis? Can I sit down?" Bobby nodded. She sat down and introduced herself. "I'm Amy, another nurse. I'm married and have no intention of starting an affair with you, not even an emotional one. I don't know you or your wife. I don't support cheating wives. The only reason we brought our friend Charlie here tonight was to cheer her up. Since she ruined her marriage, she has been doing penance, waiting to see what her husband decides to do next. Since he destroyed her at their anniversary, he hasn't even made a symbolic gesture toward her." Bobby couldn't resist the opportunity. "So your friend Charlie must have cheated, but now her husband is a man? Why do you say that? She's had a hard time ever since he came out to her family and friends. She made a mistake, and it took intense therapy to understand and accept her role in all of this. But he just walked away and left her to suffer. Don't you think he suffered too? Maybe he left because he couldn't stand any more reminders of what she destroyed. Why don't you talk to him before you assume he's the bad guy here?" "Well, we can't find him. His daughter had to manage her mother's care, and she's only 18. She doesn't deserve to be in that position. Doesn't your friend have other relatives? You mentioned that she was exposed in front of them." Amy snorted. "Her family seems to adore this creep. They told her to deal with the situation since she caused this whole problem. I don't think even her parents know how depressed she was, and pretty much still is. She tried a new tactic. I'm not here to talk about my friend. She and her husband need to sit down and figure out what they're going to do. She's barely holding on. Last I heard, he was driving a truck somewhere in the country. Apparently, he doesn't have any problems now." Bobby answered, "As far as you know, he has no problems. Also, as far as you know, he is grieving and has left town to try to heal. You don't really know anything. As someone who has been deceived, I tend to sympathize more with him than with the unfaithful wife." Amy tried to return to his problem. After all, that was what attracted women to him in the first place. "Do you know where your wife is now? Is she waiting for you to call?" Bobby shook his head. "As far as I know, she sits in a bar like this one, waiting for someone to pick her up. She was a homebody until she got involved with her lover. Then she started going to bars and was rarely home. She lied and said she was working overtime and taking extra shifts, but she was actually with her lover. Since everything fell apart, I don't know how she spends her time. I was away for a while, but now I'm back and still weighing my options." "How long have you been together?" "Over 20 years. I thought we had a good life and were getting ready to become empty nesters. I would have quit my job if she had agreed. In fact, a month before everything fell apart, I offered to take her on a long vacation, and she immediately refused. She didn't even hesitate. She said she could not leave work for such a long vacation. I believe her lover told her to stay here so they could continue their affair. Do you feel like you have too much invested in her to let go? When all this happened, I seriously viewed our marriage as a bad investment. There comes a time when you need to cut your losses and start again. I've thought about it a lot since then, and I'm willing to try again, but only if she can somehow convince me that she is as committed to the marriage. I don't know what she can do or prove to make me believe she is serious. Trust is so hard to build and so easy to break. Ask your friend how she is going to make her husband believe in her and their relationship again. Perhaps she has the insight I need." They talked for a bit before Bobby asked the real question. "I've heard of women who get so caught up in trying to help some poor guy that they end up in bed with him. How is that possible? I mean, I'm not trying to have an intimate, but if I wanted to, how does a woman justify ruining a relationship to help someone else? Do you really believe that you can have an emotional and physical relationship with someone who is not your husband and then, when it's over, just go back and act like nothing happened? How do you act when you're cheating on your husband? Are you so good at pretending that it doesn't affect you at all, having a night with a stranger and not giving any affection to your husband or significant other?" He leaned forward. "Do you want to help me? I mean really help. Then tell me how a woman does this to her man, her lover, the man she stood before family, friends, and God with, and promised to love, respect, and honor until the day she dies. I can't believe that I can forgive and return to my wife until I understand this. I can understand how a man does this. From birth, society teaches us to be studs. A man who sleeps with many women is considered something good. It goes against his entire upbringing when he finally stands up and promises to be faithful to his wife. A good man cheats on his wife, but since we have dignity, we can usually keep women in the dark about the affair until something else opens the wife's eyes. The wife is the caretaker of the family, and this goes against most women's upbringing to have multiple lovers at the same time. So again, how does she justify cheating on a good man? Amy couldn't find the answer to his question. Her marriage was strong, and she was never tempted to cheat. She tried to come up with some explanation for the strange behavior but eventually admitted that she didn't know. "Look, Robert, give me a few minutes. I'll ask my friend Charlie, and maybe, thanks to her therapy, she can answer your question." She stood up and returned to the table while Bobby ordered another drink. He was starting to get a little drunk. He didn't want to risk his CDL, so he decided to stop after that and only ordered beer, no whiskey. He noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. Amy seemed to ask Charlie a question. Charlie didn't take it well. She immediately began to sob, not just cry. Bobby heard her at his table and became even sadder. He seemed to only create bad feelings with everything he tried to do. He finished his beer and called a taxi. He stoically tried not to look at the table of women. He had ruined their plan to cheer up Charlie. He hoped the taxi would arrive soon. When the taxi arrived, Bobby was notified, paid the bill, and prepared to leave. The women also seemed to be getting ready to leave. Amy waved her hand at him, and he reluctantly walked over to the table where Charlie was still quietly crying. He hoped she wouldn't recognize him. Given her condition, she might not realize he was nearby. He wanted to comfort her, but he had been honest with Amy that he needed to get one basic question answered. Charlie couldn't answer the question, even though she was guilty of the same thing as Bobby's wife. She tried to talk about it but then realized that her husband probably wanted to know the same thing. Her therapist must have too. Bobby nodded to show he understood and turned to leave before Charlie could see him. It didn't work. Something in his walk made her recognize him. He heard her cry, "Bobby, oh God, Bobby, please talk to me. Let me explain, please." Bobby kept walking. He couldn't talk to her now. As he continued walking, he heard her start to hysterically try to break free from her friend's arms to catch up with him. He stopped and turned to her. He didn't want her to get hurt trying to get to him, so he returned to the table. Charlie finally pulled away from the large table. Her friends were shocked and almost paralyzed by the revelation that the man they were trying to help was Charlie's husband. Charlie rushed to him, and he reflexively hugged her. She pressed herself against his chest. "I'm so sorry I didn't recognize you. I should have been able to pick you out in a crowd. You were just sitting there alone. Where were you? How are you? You look good. Can you come home with me? Chelsea will be so glad to see you. I'll call Ted and Greg and tell them you're home," she said, talking nonstop. Bobby smiled at her. She was so sincere. Then his smile disappeared. She still hadn't explained what made her cheat on him. No matter what she did or what she asked, she needed to explain what happened. He pulled away from her embrace. She stopped talking and looked at him through the tears covering her eyes. "First of all, no, I'm not going to your house tonight. I just got back into town, and I need to rest before we start discussing the next step. I'll contact Chelsea tomorrow and set up a meeting. If she wants to, I will. I don't know if the kids will talk to me after I dealt this blow to you all. We'll have to see." Charlie wasn't happy, but she had to understand. Her therapist had told her that this would be difficult for any man to accept and forgive. It would take time and effort. She nodded and turned to her friends. "I think we'd better get going." She turned back to Bobby. "Thank you for coming back and talking to me, even for a minute. I appreciate it. Please don't wait to get in touch with us. We all really want to see you again." She stopped and fiddled with something near her neck, then pulled out a silver cylinder on a chain. She unscrewed the lid and showed him the contents. "I always wear your gift. I take it out and wish you would come back so I can give you a gift or two. I think I owe you a lot of gifts and a lot of love." She showed him the silver bullet. The other women gasped when they saw it. They were sure it had been taken from her. Then she stunned him. "If you can't find a way to go home, then please find a weapon that fits. I can't buy one because I was hospitalized with suicidal thoughts. If you can't go home, then let me end this torment." Bobby shook his head. He would never allow her to have a gun. She misunderstood the symbolism of the bullet and thought it was meant for herself and not for anyone who tricked her. "No, Charlie, I will never buy you a gun. I gave it as a reminder to never cheat on anyone again. If you're going to cheat, you'd better shoot the person you love rather than yourself. You have to live with the destruction you cause." He retreated. "I'll call you soon. Be ready to answer the question. There has to be an answer I can understand before anything else happens." He turned to the others. "Thank you, ladies, for your patience tonight. I'm sorry if I caused too much stress and ruined your evening. Please make sure Charlie gets home. I think she needs to be where she feels comfortable and safe." The women nodded. Charlie was crying again. Amy took the bullet and returned it to the container, about to take it away, but Charlie grabbed it and pressed it to her heart, saying, "No, it's mine. My husband gave it to me for our 25th anniversary. No one touches it except him and me." She looked a little unbalanced as she said this. Now the nurses understood how she was able to return the bullet. She could have remained in an uncontrollable state if she had not returned it. Bobby leaned over to Amy and whispered, "There's no gunpowder in it. She couldn't shoot it even if she tried." Amy nodded in understanding and hurried to lead the group to the cars. Bobby followed them and found that the taxi had left. It was now raining, which suited his mood as he stood and allowed himself to get wet, waiting for another taxi. With intensive therapy, Bobby and Charlie finally got back together. Charlie stayed on as a part-time nurse and did not return to full-time work. Trust issues remained. Bobby checked on Charlie periodically but realized he couldn't account for all of her time as a part-time worker, so he stopped that practice and only occasionally wondered if she was cheating again. For her part, Charlie went to great lengths to prove to her husband that she could be trusted again. She called and told him where she was shopping and even insisted on turning on the locator app on her phone so he could see where she was at all times. She tried never to dine, even with a friend, at a restaurant located next to a hotel or motel. She no longer went out in the evenings with her friends, even at Bobby's insistence. She could invite her friends home in the evening or go to a party, but she never went to the bar without Bobby. When they went out to the bar, they danced together most of the night. Her smiles were now only for him. Chelsea eventually forgave Bobby, but her relationships with Ted and Greg were strained at best. The boys also found it difficult to build relationships after their mother's betrayal. Trust had become rare in their lives. They answered calls but did not initiate them. Conversations were short and to the point. Bobby regretted the way he treated them. If he could do it all over again, he would have informed them in advance so they would have been warned, but his anger at Charlie then clouded his judgment. Charlie's family accepted Bobby back but privately questioned why he forgave Charlie. It was even harder for them to forgive her than it was for Bobby himself. Her relationship with her family never recovered to its former closeness. Ron was never heard from again. The story spread, and no one tried to pick up women this way again for a long time. Their love life never fully recovered. Despite his best efforts in therapy, Bobby was unable to overcome a mental block that prevented him from experiencing arousal. Even with modern medications, he struggled with a mental block that prevented him from enjoying penetrative intimacy. Sometimes he had intimate thoughts, but they were very rare. He just couldn't think about intimacy anymore. They bought several toys for a night, and he used them to pleasure his wife, but he could not participate himself. They often hugged and snuggled, and when Charlie became very upset, she used the toys to relieve her stress. Ultimately, Charlie was never able to fully explain why she did what she did. She tried to understand it, but it remained an issue between them for the rest of their lives. Despite their weaknesses, they both enjoyed a full life together. What do you think of our story today? I think that this story, although long, was not less interesting because of its plot and uninteresting plot twists. What is your impression of the story? Write in the comments. See you in the next video.